Rosemary had been able to put the sauce, that is not the word.
The sauce.
Oil.
Oh, yeah.
Some yummy lamp oil.
Welcome back to another episode of Is Fitz Happy? I'm Luke.
And I'm Emma.
This week we're discussing chapter 26, Skilling. Getting close to the end of Royal Assassin here.
I know. After this chapter, we only have like 4 more chapters.
Well, it's actually quite a few. It goes up to chapter 33 and then the epilogue. But this is like the start of...
The end.
Yeah, the start of the last climax, the last plot here.
There's not very much book left in my hand, so...
The beginning part of this chapter goes through a excerpt from Chade's writings on the Forged Ones and Skilling in general. Mainly how the Forged Ones aren't evil necessarily, they just have lost their ability to be a part of society. They have lost their ability to feel. And he specifically says their emotions did not simply stop, they were forgotten, lost to them so entirely that they could not even predict the behavior of other humans based on emotional reaction. So that whole part of their brain was gone.
Mm-hmm.
And he also mentions that a skilled one might be seen as the other end of that spectrum, that they have an increased sensitivity to emotions and the thoughts of others, and therefore has more of what the Forged Ones are lacking. And in that case, that might be what drew the Forged Ones to Verity as he was skilling out from Buckkeep, because when he left, they stopped going towards Buckkeep.
Right. And I found it very interesting that specifically twice, I believe, it says something about how skilling is part of what people are feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's imposing your own feelings on others or knowing what they're feeling, which is interesting because I thought that was all wit. And it seems as though there's a little bit of an overlap in some way.
Yeah, there's definitely overlap. And that's why the wit and skilled Fitz chivalry has all that ability amplified, like we've been talking about, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, you know, the ability to link your mind with somebody around you with the skill, and then the raw emotion and attitude of somebody with the wit, it's just like amplified throughout hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Very. And in this, Chade is musing on whether or not this lack of emotion is what drove the Forged Ones to Verity.
Yeah. Did his reaching out awaken in them a hunger, a remembrance, perhaps, of what they had lost?
And yeah, and it says that once Verity left, there were no more Forged Ones spotted coming towards the castle. So pretty clearly, it is definitely Verity.
Drawn by Skilling.
Or yes, definitely the skill, but
we don't know if it's specifically the specific reasons why, technically.
True.
We jump into the chapter exactly where we left off, where Fitz and Burrich were leaving the Great Hall to go to the king to enact their plan that they had created here to contact Verity with the skill. And they knock on the door. Fool opens it up and does not let them in. He just kind of like cracks it and says no, starts to close the door, and Fitz and Burrich push their way in past the fool. I took no joy in proving that I was physically stronger than he was. The look in his eyes as I forced him aside was something no one should ever see in a friend's face. The fool knows a little bit of what's happening, and like we discussed last episode, he knows that the king can possibly die from this, and that's probably a good chance that the king can die from this.
Yeah. And not only that the king could die, but whatever happens tonight will be the thing that pushes Shrewd into for sure dying.
Yeah.
So even if he doesn't die tonight, this is the path that leads towards early death rather than a comfortable one a few years later, presumably.
Right. Yeah. So Burrich and Fitz gain access to the king's chambers. They see Kettricken, queen in waiting, sitting by the king, and Rosemary dozing at her feet. So it's just those four in there. Wallace is a guest down at the feast still, and they noted that he is alone, and it probably won't be like this after tonight.
Yeah, this will be the last chance to see the king.
Fitz coming in, of course, surprises Kettricken, and she is asking what he's doing there, and he asks her to remember and basically brings up the skill again, saying, remember when you and Verity first talked, when you were promised to him, he spoke in your mind and showed himself. I was there too. Don't be embarrassed by it. We'll breeze past that really quick.
Yeah. No need to think about it for too long.
He connected to you by the skill, which is a hereditary magic that the Farseers mostly have, which I have as well, and I believe that we can contact Verity with this magic through King Shrewd. And he tells her that he doesn't believe that Verity is dead, and goes on to explain their plan, yes, maybe we can do this with King Shrewd. He can use my strength to contact his son.
Mm-hmm.
And the fool again is still trying to stop this plan because there's a few reasons why, but he explains it will kill him. I've heard what the skill takes out of a man. My king has not that left to give. And Fitz, of course, is arguing against this, and the fool still goes on, saying, even a fool can see the failure of your logic. If you reach Verity, how will we know it is true and not a show? Of course, my dear Fitz, we should all believe you, as you are our friend, who has only our very best interests at heart, but there may be so few others prone to doubt your word or regard you as so selfless. His sarcasm bit at me like acid. And if you don't reach Verity, what do we have? An exhausted and drained king to be further flaunted about as incapable, a grieving queen who must wonder, in addition to all her other pains, if perhaps she grieves for a man who is not dead yet. That is the worst type of grieving there is. No, we gain nothing even if you succeed, for our belief in you would not be enough to stop the wheels that are already turning, and we have much to lose if you fail. Too much. And that speech kind of helps to turn Burrich as well.
Yeah. It has changed Burrich's mind and made him look at the bigger picture and not just, well, if we prove Verity's alive, everything will get fixed, which is a little naive in itself. I see where it comes from, but the fool laying it out the way he has pointed out that even if they do make contact, how do they prove it? Because Fitz isn't known to have... In fact, it's widely known that he does not have the skill.
Right.
Because he failed the training. So it'd be very easy to dismiss him. And it could hurt the king even more, which is all of the people in there's only protection at the moment.
Which it ends up doing.
Yeah.
So obviously these are great reasons not to do this, but...
But Fitz is not convinced.
Yeah.
Why do you think he so strongly pushes on through?
Burrich asks him about it later as well, and they talk about it. It could possibly be addiction, but also it might just be what you explained before, that hope that Verity has to be alive, and probably for more than just the kingdom reasons for Fitz. It's probably personal reasons as well. He just needs to know if Verity's alive.
I was wondering if there's a little bit of naivety of...
Could be.
If Verity is alive and we contact him, he will fix this. Just like a short-sightedness on Fitz's part.
Could be, yeah. Fitz knows, like we mentioned before, that it was now or it would not happen at all because Wallace was out of the way and Regal was busy below. He never talked to Chade about it, and he kind of wishes he had at this point, but it's now or never. And so he says, he is still the king. Let us ask him and let him decide. The fool, of course, is saying not fair. He's not himself. Basically, he's super pliable with all the pain meds that they give him. He can't really make a rational decision for himself and for his well-being at the moment.
Right. Like, the fool is saying that if you gave him or if you told him to kill himself, he would just wait for the knife.
Yeah.
And do it. It's just not a good time.
King Shrewd pipes up and says, No, my fool, I am not so far gone as that. But he doesn't say anything else. So Fitz, in that silence, crouches down and asks him, Do you believe Verity is dead? And Shrewd replies that Regal has told me Verity is dead. He had word from a messenger, he thinks.
Mm-hmm.
So Fitz and Burrich have a discussion about if that's possible, and Fitz knows that it would have to be a messenger coming down.
And they talk through all the parts that don't quite make sense. Mostly, if it was from a messenger from the mountains, why wouldn't they have told Kettricken first herself in person? Also, why would they leave immediately and not stay with Kettricken if they're from the mountains?
Right.
And then if it wasn't someone from the mountains, who would have come? How would they have gotten here in time?
Yeah, and this is what I was talking about last episode when you were asking about timeline, Emma.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where Burrich says that they could come in a relay, and Fitz goes through the days that he last knew Verity was alive. And Burrich says it's still possible. If Verity were killed that day and word were sent out immediately and the riders and horses were both good, it could be so. Barely. So technically it could have happened that he did die and the riders were sent, but there's a lot of hints that this is not so. Yeah, and especially so that they know that Regal has, a motive to lie about this.
Mm-hmm. And he's been the one to say it. He's the one who heard word. It just feels a little suspicious. But to be fair, Regal didn't know that he had to follow a timeline because he doesn't know Fitz even had contact with Verity. I mean, he knows something's going on, but I don't think he realizes that Fitz was letting Verity live in his head for so long. So it's really, honestly, super good timing on Regal's part. Because it isn't true and he just made it up. But the fact that the day he picked just happened to be one that feasibly could be true is actually pretty lucky on his part.
And also in terms of your questioning, why would the mountain messenger not stay with Kettricken? It's because if it was a relay, it would be a different rider.
Right.
So the mountain messenger would take the first leg, and then it would be inland duchy people who would go directly to Regal. So technically, it is plausible that a messenger could have come.
Right.
And they would not have stayed because they don't care about Kettricken, because it's an inland duchy person who's be like this white fish or white cow or whatever they call her.
I think both, probably.
Yeah, both. So there is that doubt still lingering in Burrich's mind. He doesn't dissuade Fitz in this moment or speak up much more than giving his expertise on if that timeline would be possible. But there is that little, that little hint that this could be true, that Verity could be dead.
Yeah.
Technically.
Right. And Fitz uses that and runs with it, in which he asks, he asked Shrewd, do you really think your son could go like that just in the middle of nowhere and you wouldn't feel anything? And then we learn a little detail of Chivalry's death that is really sad. Chivalry went like that, like a fading whisper. Father, he said, I think. Father.
The silence descends, and after a time, Shrewd raises his hand and puts it on Fitz's shoulder. I'm sure beneath all of this, Shrewd, despite being, what we know he is, a shrewd king, a shrewd man, a man who plots and uses his tools as he sees fit for the future of the kingdom, he's still a father and he wants to know about his sons.
Yeah.
Pointing that detail out, I think Fitz really got to him, saying, like, you need closure on this because you didn't hear anything.
Yeah.
And Shrewd reaches out and goes for the skill.
Yeah. It is really interesting that Chivalry's death was so quiet, and that he reached out for his father in his last moment. We know he died on horseback. Something happened on horseback. We're not sure
Emma,
what.
we know he fell from horseback and died instantly.
That's true.
Duh.
I feel like Patience would have seen if it was like an arrow or something.
Yeah, it
Had to have been poison
it
of
was
some
probably
sort,
poison.
right?
Yeah.
But wild. Really sad, though.
So Fitz and Shrewd tumble into the Skill River. We tumbled together in the sweeping current of the world. There's no one here but us anymore. Shrewd sounded lonely. And Fitz is starting to lose himself in this. He hears a disembodied voice filling and floating around him. It's Verity's voice saying, being open is simply not being closed. The whole world was a spaceless place, all things inside of all other things. I did not say his name aloud or think of his face. Verity was there, had always been right there, and joining him was effortless. You live. Of course. But you won't, spilling all over like this. You're pouring out everything you have in one gush. Regulate your strength. Be precise. He steadied me, shaped me back into myself, then gasped in recognition. Father! Verity pushed at me roughly. Get back! Let go of him! He hasn't the strength for this! You're draining him, you idiot! Let go! It was like being repelled, but rougher. Before I move on to the rest of that scene, I do want to comment that Verity is telling Fitz that he's using all of his strength in one gush. He's not using the strength that he has in a precise manner. So he's draining the king at probably an astronomical rate of his strength and just shoving it all into this, trying to find Verity.
Yeah.
So it's super dangerous.
Oh, for sure. It's very surprising that the king lives, especially because we know what has happened to him for the past however long, that he's been being slowly drained of skill. I'm surprised that he made it through this whole ordeal. And
so Fitz wakes up and he's collapsed. He can barely move or see or anything, but he sees that the king's lips were blue, puffing in and out with each breath, and there's a bluish cast to his skin. Fitz demands that they do something in the room, and obviously no one there knows what to do, so he kind of croaks out elf bark, and they prepare tea. Burrich starts feeding it to the king, who can't swallow, but forces him to swallow with his knowledge. And the king seems to stabilize a little bit. He's still in a very rough spot. Kettricken feeds some to Fitz, and Fitz is in his head this whole time saying, like, yeah, I skilled, but I had tapped my king's strength to do it. You will be the death of kings, the fool had told me. A prophecy or a shrewd guess? A shrewd guess. Tears came to my eyes. And so, as they're feeding the tea, of course, everyone's worried about if Shrewd is going to live through this, and Fitz hears that yes, he'll live, which is a huge relief. And Regal barges in pretty much right at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
My father, Regal shouted the words. He stood swaying in the door, red face red with drink and anger. Behind him, I glimpsed his guard and little Rosemary peeping around the corner, wide-eyed. Somehow she managed to slip past the men to race to Kettricken and clutch at her skirts.
Interesting. Wasn't she just sleeping on the floor in front of Kettricken? How did she get out by Regal's guards?
Interesting.
What a small detail I 100% did not remember. And didn't pick up on either, because I'm all like, is the king gonna die? But the first read through. But this time I'm like, I can't believe that little snitch.
Yep. Went and ran and got the guards and Regal.
Do you think Regal had told her, if Fitz comes, come get me?
Probably. Something like that.
Or just anyone in general? Because I don't think he would care about the king's safety. But also, why would he care? Oh, I guess because he thinks there's a conspiracy, which low-key there kind of is a conspiracy
At this point,
going on.
He doesn't think that, though. Chade mentions that later. He says that Regal assumes that he won, everything is good to go, but now that people showed up and something happened in the king's room, he's like, maybe it's not over. Maybe there is a conspiracy.
But he thought there was a conspiracy because that's why he beat up the fool to begin with, that
Someone was talking to Verity. Yes.
Yeah, that Verity is somehow still has his strings here or something.
But with this and with the news of Verity being dead, he thinks he's cut everything out. And so this like reawakens his suspicions again.
Right.
So I think it was just if Regal or Burrich or excuse me, if Fitz goes to the king's room, let me know. Because after this he does clamp down on Fitz's, quarantine of Buckkeep as well again and a bunch of stuff. So I really do think that was like the warning. Like if anyone tries to mess with the king or without my knowing, I don't know.
Yeah.
He sweeps into the room and basically asks, what are you doing? What are you feeding him? What's going on? And everyone has a pretty convincing story kind of pop out of their mouth that the fool says that the king had another attack. Elf bark tea is a common restorative, and I'm sure that even Wallace has heard of it. And Regal kind of subsides slightly and asks what's Fitz doing then. He's on the ground. He's being fed tea as well. And Kettricken says he's drunk. Stablemaster, get him out of here. You should have stopped him before he got this far. Next time, see that you use your judgment when he has none of his own. Our stablemaster is well known for having his own taste for the cup, Lady Queen. I suspect they have been at it together, Regal sneered.
Which is rich coming from the guy who's so drunk. It has his wine glass still in hand,
right?
Like swaying as he talks. Like, they're known for drinking, those lame peasants. Like, okay, Regal.
The news of Verity's death hit him hard, Burrich said simply. And Burrich grabs Fitz roughly and drags him out.
And Fitz doesn't really have a hard time acting drunk because he is very weak. So it is hard to stay steady on his feet and to keep his head upright.
Yeah, and as he was walking out or being dragged out by Burrich, he heard Queen Kettricken rebuking Regal, saying he should be below with his guests, and promising that she and the fool could get the king to bed. As we were going up the stairs, I heard Regal and his guard coming down. They got Regal out of there pretty quickly, luckily. And luckily they tricked him for now.
Yeah.
But he's still ranting and complaining that he was not stupid and he could tell a plot when he saw one. It worried me, but I was fairly certain he had no real idea of what had been going on. So this is where Regal's suspicions get sparked again, a little bit. Mm-hmm. He knows he's won, but still there might be something on the background that he doesn't want going on, so he'll stamp that out how he can.
Right. But also, if I'm being honest, would it have taken Regal really anything more than just a weird look from Fitz to think there was something going on? He's a little
Probably
crazy.
Not. Yeah.
To his benefit, there is something going on he doesn't know about.
He's not really wrong about any of his guesses, to be honest.
Being super fair to him, there is a secret thing going on that he has no hand in. But on the offside of that, it's because he's a tyrant and the worst person ever. So of course there's things going on. But so I don't want to make it seem like he's delusional. He's just a little bit too full of himself in thinking that clearly the reason is because no one wants to see him on the throne. Not because of who he is as a person, but they're just mad because he's so much better than them, which is misplaced. But yeah, I think even if tonight wouldn't have happened, he would have found some reason to think there was something going on. So as they get to Fitz's room, Fitz has to open up the door and Burrich waits, and he follows Fitz in which he tells him, "If I had a dog that was as sick as often as you are, I'd put it down," he observed kindly. "Do you need more elf bark?" And now Burrich is very worried about Fitz.
Oh yeah, extremely.
He was worried before, but I think that's overshadowed by the literal king almost dying. And then after that's been kind of taken care of, the most immediate threat is done. Now it's time to worry about Fitz, and Burrich wants to know what's going on, and are you addicted to skilling?
Yeah. Well, he sets down the cup of elf bark tea that he makes for Fitz, and then looks about himself. Something like disgust was on his face. "Why do you live like this?" he demanded. "Like what? In so bare a room with so little care for it. I've seen wintered quartered tents that were homier than this room. It's as if you've never expected to stay here more than a night or two longer." I shrugged. "I've never given it much thought." There was a silence for a bit. "You should," he said unwillingly, "and you should think about how often you're hurt or sick."
This is so interesting because this is coming from the man who made Fitz sleep basically on his hearth like a dog for most of his childhood. Did he really ever give Fitz any knickknacks or anything? Did Fitz have a knack for decoration while he was there or something? It's just odd. And also, he was there for Fitz's childhood. He knows that Fitz isn't really welcome in the keep and that he doesn't really fit in because he is a bastard of royalty. And why would Fitz... I don't know, it just seems odd that Burrich is just now realizing, hey, Fitz kind of lives like there's no permanence in his situation, as though he doesn't feel like he has a home here at all. And he's been living like this his whole life.
Yeah, I think combined with that last sentence, you should think about how often you're hurt or sick. It really shows a concern for how Fitz has been living recently and his thoughts on the matter, because like we mentioned before, Burrich is thinking about how willingly Fitz throws himself into dangerous situations, and looking at a room that is just bare stone walls with a very old tapestry that was there beforehand, a bed and a chest with clothes and some herbs.
Presumably
that's it.
A desk.
Maybe.
Well, he has to read the scrolls somewhere. I assume it's on a desk.
Maybe. I thought they were all on his bed.
Oh. I guess I just put in a desk in my mind.
It's an extremely sparse room that with all the furniture that had been there beforehand.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a hobby in there. He doesn't have any accumulated things over, the 10 years he's been living there.
That's a good point.
There's literally nothing to show any personality besides a chest with his clothes in it.
Yeah.
It's probably also not cleaned.
Yeah, it's probably really gross.
He does mention that, let me see here. He built up a fire, put water in the kettle, and set it to heat. He found a pot and put in flaked elf bark, then found a mug and wiped the dust out of it. So, obviously, Fitz doesn't really clean very often either. So,
right.
It's literally just a place to sleep.
Well, to be fair, he is worried about his life all of the time.
Yeah.
And so he can't really make it homey because that's a weakness. And all of his hobbies are like killing people.
Right,
so.
Yeah. But I think Burrich is like realizing that and how, how he should look after himself a little bit more.
I just am frustrated by it because he's talking to Fitz as though it's Fitz, this 17-year-old boy, like, has no reason to have such a bare room and why isn't Fitz more normal, as though any part of Fitz's life has been normal. I don't know. It just makes me a little frustrated that Burrich doesn't have more care about, wow, probably I'm part of the reason it's like this, or in some capacity because I raised him, and instead is like, you're an adult, you should know better. That's like the tone I get from this, is you should be taking better care of yourself, young man. I don't know if that makes sense.
Burrich did take way better care of his room and his places, and he taught Fitz way better.
Sure,
I mean,
yeah.
He says, in so bare a room with so little care for it. So obviously this room is like not kept at all. So I feel like it's a little bit, admonishment of like, hey, I taught you better than this, first of all. But also, I feel like I don't know. I don't see it as you should be normal or like other people. I see it as like, you're not taking care of your room like I taught you, and you don't think you're going to be here very long, and you're throwing yourself into these dangerous situations. Have a care of how sick or hurt and how often that happens. I think it comes out more of a place of concern for his well-being and his fatalistic tendencies and suicidal tendencies, honestly.
Yeah, I guess I don't disagree that it's coming from a place of worry and parental kindness. I guess it just
rubs you the wrong way.
Yeah, it does rub me the wrong way. And I don't know what it is about it, but it just feels like he should have been saying this earlier, maybe. It's not like this is the first time.
Very often.
Well, it's not the first time either, though. This is like, I don't know, not the first time. And so I guess I'm just like, okay, just now when it's life or death, you're like, maybe I should have taught Fitz to care more about things instead of people.
And they have a discussion about what happened tonight. Burrich basically saying, you're the one who pressed for it. You didn't really have to do this. Again, it didn't prove anything, just like the fool said. And Fitz basically saying, I had to do it. Burrich goes on to explain a little bit more. He says, I know a little bit about the skill. I was a king's man for chivalry, and this, what happens to you, didn't happen to me every single time. It only happened a couple times, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that the completion of it, the oneness of the world is super, it feels amazing, and a man can get addicted, chivalry said. So that man might look for excuses to skill. And then finally, he is absorbed into it. It's not unlike the rush of battle in some ways, the sense of moving unhampered by time, of being a force more powerful than life itself. Fitz says, as I cannot skill alone, I dare say it is not a danger to me. And Burrich responds, you offer yourself very often to those who can, as often as you willingly plunge yourself into dangerous situations that offer that same kind of excitement. In a battle, you go into a frenzy. Is that what happens to you when you skill? I had never considered the two together in such light. Something like fear nibbled at me. I pushed it aside. And Fitz, as he's pushing that aside, really pushes back against that and says, it had to be done. I had to do it. I'm a king's man. And they kind of move on from that direct conversation about Fitz's well-being.
Right. But I found the imagery of Fitz coming apart in the same way he does in the Skill River while he's battling very interesting. Like Fitz, I had not thought of his skill in that way, or his battle frenzy in that way. And it must come from some level of not having control, I suppose.
Yeah. I feel like it is very similar. It's that you lose your sense of self, because to study yourself in the Skill River, or when they're walking on the Skill Road, you think like, I am me. You're centering yourself. You get your whole definition of who you are in your mind, and you focus on that. And when you're battling, or when he goes into that battle rage, berserker mode, he loses exactly who he is and loses himself in those emotions of the people around him and shares that with Night Eyes.
Do you think that's partially because he doesn't know who he is? He has so many compartments and versions of himself that he has to play at any given time. They're masks he picks up depending on who he's with. But I don't know that he's ever just Fitz.
I could definitely see that, yeah.
And maybe you do need to be able to find yourself before you can successfully wield this magic or battle, apparently.
Could definitely be true. I like that. And so they talk about what we just spoke on, that they don't really have proof that Verity's alive, even though he did talk to him, or, the king talked to Verity. Burrich says, great, he's alive. You said that to the queen. I knew it before we went in. I was convinced of that anyways. So what did this actually change? It's like the fool said. Regal won't stop his king-in-waiting ceremony. Like, it's not going to change. The king won't speak up for it, probably. And even if he does, Regal will just carry on anyways.
Right. And basically, the king-in-waiting ceremony happens in a week.
Yeah.
So if you can figure something out between now and then that makes it more concrete, good luck.
And so the effects of the elf bark start to kick in. He got fed a very heavy dose, and a bleakness is rolling in on him. And he's thinking, the fool had been right. What I had done tonight counted for little, save the peace of mind it brought Kettricken. Beer kind of looks at him and says, a bleak spirit is sometimes what follows an overindulgence in elf bark. Go to bed. Fitz is thinking to himself that maybe that accounts for Verity's often dour moods, and that's almost definitely true. When they were feeding him constant elf bark tea supply to help his headaches or, his exhaustion more so. And as Burrich is leaving, he mentions that he has spoke to Molly recently, which, gets Fitz riled up again.
Right. And he lets him know that she had been to his room more often than usual and clearly wanted to know about Fitz, and Burrich let her know that Fitz missed her.
She said nothing, but she blushes very prettily. And he asks her about if anyone has been bothering her lately, and she basically says what we expect Molly to say and say, I can take care of myself. Leave me alone.
Right. And this kind of worries Burrich. And he asks, do you think she's going to ask for help if she needs it? To which Fitz sighs and says, probably not.
Yeah, I don't know, really.
Yeah, she makes me feel weak and cowardly because she has her own well of braveness that she is not afraid to use.
Yeah.
And Burrich tries to make him feel better by saying, well, clearly she just doesn't understand the stakes, and it doesn't make you a coward just because you do, which is a valid point.
It is. It's 100% true. He says, I'll watch over her as well as I can, as much as she'll let me. And he leaves. And Fitz is alone with his thoughts. A better man's thoughts would have been solely of his king's plight. I am afraid a good share of mine went to Molly, alone in her room. When I could stand it no more, I rose from my bed and ghosted out into the keep. And he is going to go to Molly's room. He says he's going to be good, just, very, very careful, tap at her door, be there for a few moments, see if she was all right. No more than that, just the briefest of visits.
He checks the corridor and it seems empty. He's trying to be silent while going towards the stairs. And then Night Eyes lets him know that he's being followed. And he can't stop because then whoever was following him would know that he knows. So he has to just keep going, but he tries to look around nonchalantly by itching his shoulder to turn his head. And he notices that...
He notices nothing, actually, with the glance.
Yes, he notices nothing, but when he reaches out With the skill.
And when Night Eyes tells him to snuff.
Oh, yes.
To use his wolf senses, he can smell Will.
Sweat and garlic.
Yeah.
Gross. Not the kind of scent I would want people to describe me as having, if I'm being honest. But also wild that that's how he knows it's Will, which begs a few questions. Number one, what is it about that boy that makes him always smell of sweat and garlic? Does he just have like...
Hey, garlic's delicious, so...
It is, but how available is it in the...
I don't know.
In the keep? And what's going on with his hygiene habits? Didn't Galen like make them clean rigorously or something?
Yeah. Probably sweat during the day, though.
I suppose. I don't know. All I'm saying, it's a little wild that sweat and garlic, it definitely Will.
That's probably... Sweat and garlic is probably what Fitz could smell, but he was able to identify Will through Night Eyes'
Yes,
sense.
I'm sure. But it just is funny to think, like, ooh.
Yeah.
You're known as the guy that smells like garlic and sweat.
But he reaches out with the skill then to barely touch the skill shield that hid Will from him, a subtle bidding that I not notice him, a quiet scent of self-confidence sent my way to bolster me in doing whatever I wished to do. Very guileful, very artful, much more delicate a touch than either Serene or Justin had ever shown me. A much more dangerous man. And he is. That's extremely subtle.
Yeah.
And not something that Galen would have done either.
Right.
Because Galen was one to say that I am superior to you. I will do, you'll do as I wish. And here Will is just sending the slightest hint of confidence to Fitz and saying, don't notice me, and that's it.
Yeah, kind of crazy. Also, okay, don't like to point out when things are wrong because this is 16 books that Robin Hobb wrote, so clearly there are going to be mistakes. But we know later that elf bark blocks you from the skill.
Yeah.
So technically this shouldn't have worked.
Right.
Especially with the dosage. Do you think that
I actually
means
didn't
that
notice that
elf bark wasn't thought of until later?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's next book, honestly, that they start to use it as, like, because Kettle brings it up. You shouldn't be drinking elf bark or using elf bark because it blocks and inhibits skill.
Right, but that's from the user. But then later it's used whenever, in the final series, it's used to protect themselves from the...
Yeah, because in Tawny Man, the Delvin bark, the Out Islander version, is much more potent and it blocks anything.
Okay, so
they learn it from that. But elf bark still deadens everything.
Right.
So, yes, I believe you are correct that it's a mistake.
Just a little one. And it's not that important. But it did make me think, wait a second. He's literally talking about how sad he is from elf bark 2 paragraphs ago. And now he's talking about how he was tricked by the skill. So I found that very interesting.
And even if it didn't block Will influencing him, Fitz does say very cautiously, I touched the skill shield that hid him from me. So obviously he's using his own skill to identify that. So it's a little, a
little wonky, but that's okay.
He grabs extra candles as if that was what he was going to grab all along, goes back to his room and just, in his head, he's cataloging everything. Okay, I'm pretty sure Will wasn't in my mind. Will had returned to Buckkeep this long ago. What was I doing all of these nights? Did I give anything away? And Night Eyes chimes in saying, I don't think he's followed you before, but I cannot be sure. And Fitz just kind of has to sit there and he's waiting, and Chade's door opens like he was kind of expecting, and he goes up.
It's so weird to think that now Fitz has to worry about what was I doing for the past several months. Yeah. Which luckily,
I think it's
not
only been
seeing Molly.
A couple weeks, to be honest. I'm trying to remember when Will came back, because he was stationed up north.
Yeah. But still, it's really interesting because Fitz talks about how Will is such an unopposing man and just kind of a nobody. He doesn't really stick out. He looks like everybody. He's one of those people that blends into a crowd, which makes me wonder if that's actually how he is or if that's something he does. Kind of like we know that later, what's his name? It reminds me of Thick later, because Thick,
it's like, don't see me, don't see me,
moves throughout the keep by saying don't see me. So maybe Will's been doing it for a really long time.
Could be, yeah.
Also, I'm
wondering who Will is, because all the people chosen were royalty or nobles in some way. I don't remember.
He could be a cousin of a cousin or something.
Yeah, true. But I mean, Fitz is saying he's an unimposing youth and he'd grown to be an unremarkable man. So obviously as he was a kid and growing up, he just wasn't noted or anything like that. Right. So maybe he has been doing it subconsciously for a while. Yeah,
and just figured out how to harness it.
Yeah.
Weird.
Chade pounces on Fitz as he's walking up and he's irate, obviously. An assassin is a tool, he informed me in a hiss. Somehow I never got that across to you. We are tools. We do not do anything of our own volition. I haven't killed anyone, I said indignantly. Shush, speak softly. I would not be too sure of that were I you. How many times have I done my job, not by putting the knife in myself, but simply by giving someone else sufficient reason and opportunity to do it for me? I said nothing. He looked at me and sighed, the anger and strength going out of him. Softly, he said, sometimes the best you can do is just salvage work. Sometimes we have to resign ourselves to that. We are not the ones to set the wheels in motion, boy. What you did tonight was ill-considered. And she goes on to explain, after Fitz's objection that Kettricken didn't think it was ill-considered, that Kettricken and Shrewd both would have lived and survived through that. Kettricken and her child would have lived. Shrewd would have lived. They would both have been sad. But this doesn't change anything.
And there was no reason for Regal to put them aside before.
Yeah, they were completely beaten in Regal's eyes.
Right. Well, we just got done from the scene of Regal making Kettricken little more than just a widow, a foreign widow.
Yeah, and a fool for going into battle, risking a baby.
And how is Kettricken going to hide the fact that she knows her husband is alive?
Right, exactly. Chade says she did not have to tell him that we were discovered. It will show in her bearing and in her will to resist him. He had reduced her to a widow. You have restored her to a queen in waiting. But it's for Shrewd that Chade worries about, right, because he has the actual experience. He has the proof and the way and the word of the king. He can say that Verity is alive, and
he can stop Regal from becoming king in waiting.
Things can crash down.
Yeah. It's a really good point that Kettricken is always going to be in danger just by who she is and
who Regal is.
Who Regal is, but also she is a foreigner, and that has been played too much. She has help from the coastal duchies, but right now that can't do anything because they're at war. So it's just him pointing out that you've only made it worse for everyone. You've made it more dangerous and put people in danger that did not need to be previously.
And Fitz tries to say there's a man underneath all the drugs still. In pain, yes, but he's a shrewd man. He won't tell. And Chade, of course, has to make too much sense to Fitz and say, perhaps, but that man is buried deep. And drugs like that can make a man take risks. Pain can make a man take risks or assert himself in strange ways. And they get into the conversation where Chade isn't really able to talk to Shrewd very much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Fitz kind of asks him, like, couldn't you counsel him not to say anything? And Chade's just like, I could try, but Wallace is always there. And I seldom have more than a few minutes with Shrewd at a time anymore. And I am lucky if my brother is lucid for half of them.
It's hard. And the Fool is helping. He's getting Wallace out for those few minutes, which is all he really can do.
But he also says not even the Fool can drive him away for long. Mm-hmm. He's just attached to the king.
Yeah, and this makes him mad to think about because he thought he had a good choice when he picked Wallace. Mm-hmm. He was so tactable, he had no idea he was being manipulated, and it was very easy. And now it's all gone. And this, a little bit, is Fitz's fault too, because this happened when Chade was gone, and Fitz refused to go see the king. To be fair, Chade didn't give any instructions on Fitz on what to do.
Right.
And he is still a teenager, so it would have been nice of him to do something more, but it's kind of just mistake after mistake piled on, I guess.
I do want to read this next paragraph here of Chade talking about his brother, because we don't get too much insight into Chade until the last series, the last trilogy. Mm-hmm. Fitz says, "I am sorry," I said quietly. "Sometimes I forget that he is more to you than just your king." "Well, we were never really that close, that way. But we are two old men who have grown old together. Sometimes that is a greater closeness. We have come through time to your day and age. We can talk together, quietly, and share memories of a time that exists no longer. I can tell you how it was, but it is not the same. It is like being two foreigners, trapped in a land we have come to, unable to return to our own, and having only each other to confirm the reality of the place we once lived. At least, once we could." Fitz kind of thinks back to two children running wild on the beaches of Buckkeep, of him and Molly, and just nods. It was possible to be homesick for a time and to be lonely for the only other person who could recall it. And Chade kind of changes directions there and goes back to, "Tonight we contemplate salvage."
He asks Fitz not to take actions that will have major consequences anymore. And Fitz feels bad, but responds with, "I can't make that promise because it seems like every time I do something, it has a major consequence. So I'm going to try my best, but you aren't always available to take counsel with before something happens in the moment. And somehow I always end up making the move that makes the most ripples," which is part of him being a catalyst, I suppose.
And Chade says that. "I suppose. Catalyst," he muttered. "So the Fool calls me too," I complained. Chade stopped abruptly in the midst of starting to say something. "Does he really?" he asked intently. "He clubs me with the word every chance he gets." And he kind of walks down to Chade's fireplace and asks, or it says a different thing, to change the subject, not deliberately, but he changes it away. Otherwise, I feel like Chade would continue that line of questioning a little bit more intently.
Right. I think Chade believes in the Fool.
Oh, yeah. I believe there are, I don't remember if it was in this book, the last book, or future books, where Fitz goes in and sees some of the scrolls are on the White Prophets and like that religion. I think we get an excerpt in the beginning of one of the chapters. Again, I don't remember if it was the first book or this book or what. It
hasn't happened yet, yeah.
But I believe we get an excerpt from a scroll, and it kind of talks about how Chade was looking into that religion a little bit. Which makes sense, because the Fool came all of a sudden, and I'm sure Shrewd talked to his brother and his advisor about the abilities that the Fool has to see the future, and he looked into it.
Also, he had to have met the Fool. They know about each other, so I'm sure just talking with him, he seems, I don't want to say superstitious, but because in this world magic is real and the Fool really does see the future, but he's for sure a superstitious old man. And so he's more susceptible to like believing in things more readily than Fitz is, which is so odd to me because, again, this world does have real magic. And Fitz is like, somebody who can tell the future? Pff, preposterous.
Yeah.
Like, dude, you can talk to a dog through your mind without moving your lips, and you think that's weird? Okay, cool.
So he kind of changes the subject, again bringing up what Burrich said about bleak spirits with elf bark. And Chade is just kind of going along with it. Do you find it so? Yes, but it could be the circumstances. Yet Verity seemed often depressed, and he used it frequently. Again, it could be the circumstances. And Fitz remarks that Chade has been very open. You know, saying actual names, talking about motives of people, things like that. And Chade just replies, Regal was certain he had bagged his game. All his watches were relaxed, all his spies given a night's liberty. He looked at me sourly. I am sure it will not be the same again for a while. Which is just, you know, confirming what we were talking about before, and reaffirming that notion that tonight's actions did spark some suspicion in Regal, and it will have consequences later.
Right. And also, this lets Fitz know that this conversation sparks Fitz learning that Chade can spy on most places in the castle, that he has a network of little holes that peep into different walls and rooms.
Anywhere I can listen and peep, from there it is possible I could be overheard and spied upon. Only just possible. But one does not get to be as old as I am by taking chances. An old memory suddenly made sense. You once told me that in the Queen's Garden you were blind. Exactly. So you did not know... I did not know what Galen was putting you through at the time he was doing it. I was privy to gossip, much of it unreliable, and all of it far after the fact. But on the night he beat you and left you to die, no. He looked at me strangely. Had you believed I could know such a thing and take no action? You had promised not to interfere with my instruction, I said stiffly. Chade took his chair, leaned back with a sigh. I don't think you will ever completely trust anyone, or believe that someone cares about you.
Gee, I wonder why that is. Maybe it's because his assassin that he's apprenticing under said, don't trust anybody, and not even me.
Or it's his previous mentor and father, Burrich, quote-unquote, killing his dog that he was bonded to.
True.
Or his grandfather dropping him off in the middle of the night.
His mother leaving him.
You know, there's lots of things.
I mean, yes, but also, like, pretty rich of Chade to be like, I can't believe you don't trust me, after spending his entire life, or Fitz's entire life, telling him, don't trust anybody. But also, it really gives a good look into Fitz's frame of mind, and Fitz seems to take things so literally. Whereas clearly the lines are a little bit more blurry for Chade. That yes, you have to be prepared for anything and you have to be loyal to the king if he says don't interfere, but that doesn't mean if you see something bad happening, do nothing.
Right.
And I don't know, it just is really interesting that Fitz probably would have let it happen to his friend or something if somebody in higher up position told him.
Well, you think I couldn't, come and save you if you were dying? But you promised.
Yeah, but you said you wouldn't. Yeah. Oh, Fitz.
And so Chade brings it back to, okay, we're going to salvage this situation. And Fitz asks, what can I do? And Chade's like, nothing. Just do absolutely nothing. Believe that King in Waiting Verity is dead. He is dead. Do nothing else. Placate Regal. He has to think he has won. He has to have nothing to fear. Just let it go. And Fitz stands up and starts to cut his hair off because that's what Regal would expect.
Mm-hmm.
Just short of a crowned king. So he cuts off his whole warrior's tail.
Yeah.
Or Chade cuts it off for him.
This made me think, now that Chade is like openly agreeing, yeah, Regal's pretty shady and we cannot trust him. If he has all these holes in his walls where he can watch over people, and presumably he has watched over Regal in the past, because one of Fitz's first missions was to intercept a letter from somebody to Regal. Why did Chade not ever know anything that's going on? Because Chade doesn't know that Regal is in cahoots with Kebble Rawbread, or the White Lady, the Pale Lady.
I don't think he has any eyes in Galen's tower. I think we've spoken on this before, because that tower is isolated. It's at the very top of, it's far away. And they describe it as like a very tall tower. And I think we specifically talked about Chade spying on Galen before. And I know I figured that he would not be able to, because that tower would have to be 2 times as thick as a regular tower would be, which would be suspicious.
Fair.
So if they were building a secret stairway in a tower, it would not go all the way to the top, kind of thing.
Right.
So he would not have any ears up there.
That's okay. Much better. Closes up that plot hole that I just had formed in my mind. So.
But also, Chade could hear things and suspect things about Regal. And I believe he did, because in a few conversations beforehand, he kind of hints that, like, yeah, Regal's stuff, but we can't say anything about that.
Right.
The king has not directed us. We are tools. I cannot do anything without the king's approval, because I am just a tool and his advisor. Don't speak ill, because that's treason.
Interesting.
So I think it was a little bit of both. Like, he doesn't know all the plans that he was conspiring with the enemy.
Right.
Because Fitz doesn't suspect that either.
But also, how did Regal keep that secret? He blabs about everything all the time when he's drunk, and he is always drunk.
Galen probably, it was happening at the beginning when Galen was still alive, so he and Galen were planning and plotting together, and I think Galen directed him more so in the beginning, and we kind of were talking about that too, that Regal needs that direction early, but he's kind of like run with everything now and grown into his own villain mastermind shoes. So I think Galen was mainly spearheading that because he had the skill and could contact Kebble Rawbread.
Fair enough. It just feels like still, though, Galen's been dead for kind of a while now, and he really held that one secret tight and nothing else. I'm not trying to look for plot holes. It may seem like that, but I'm just saying I wish that there was a way that they could have caught him before it got this dire.
I'm good at rationalizing things, so.
That's fair. That's why I bring to you all of my grievances.
And so Fitz asks Chade what he's going to do now. If Fitz is doing nothing, what is Chade going to do? And Chade says, I'll be trying to find a safe place for Kettricken and the king. I must make all things ready for their flight. When they go, they must vanish like shadows when the light comes. And Fitz is the one asking, do you think this is actually necessary for them to flee?
Yeah.
And Chade's like, what else is left for us? They are no more than hostages now, powerless. The inland dukes have turned to Regal. The coastal dukes have lost faith in King Shrewd. Kettricken has made herself allies amongst them, however, so I must tug the strings that she has spun and see what I can arrange. At least we can see them placed where their safety cannot be used against Verity when he comes back to reclaim his crown. If he returns, I said gloomily. When? The Elderlings will be with him. Chade looked at me sourly. Try to believe in something, boy, for my sake. Which is true, he's super pessimistic. But also, that's the Elfbark kind of talking.
A little bit. But also, Fitz doesn't really believe in Elderlings. Which, again, you live in a magic world. Why is it so crazy that maybe they're magic beings?
Yeah, but he believes in Verity, and he's gloomy about saying if Verity returns.
Oh, fair enough, fair enough.
So I really think that's the Elfbark speaking, because he has as much faith as he can in one person. It's in Verity. Or Night Eyes, I guess. But... And he describes the next week as the second worst week of his life, because the time under Galen's tutelage was the worst. No matter where he went in the keep, there were constant reminders that the foundations of his life had been shattered. Nothing would ever be as it was before. And I was kind of thinking about that. I highlighted that in my notes here.
Mm-hmm.
That is true. The time at Buckkeep as normalcy is completely gone. He's never going to be the war hero who goes out on the ships and helps against the Red Ship Raiders. After, the next week, he's going to be the bastard who killed the king.
Yeah.
And forever outcast. Like, his time at Buckkeep as a normal person is done.
Right. Also, he's going to be outed as witted.
Yeah.
And the ripples of Regal's rule will harm that image for the rest of his life.
Yep.
And I feel really bad for him. He doesn't realize, I guess because we are assuming that narrator Fitz is old Fitz, so maybe he does realize in what he's saying, but it truly won't. Not just in the sense of, wow, things are falling apart and there's not going to be much left to rule for Verity, but yeah, it's not.
And this is before Tawny Man Trilogy, and a lot of those ripples, this narration, I should say, is before Tawny Man Trilogy happens, and a lot of those old blood ripples that really happen and come to a head are in the Tawny Man Trilogy.
Yeah.
So not all the consequences have been felt even yet.
Yeah, it's a little crazy to
and
think
he's
about.
Isolated.
Also, he's isolated. But also, Fitz never really in the series ever gets to come to Buckkeep as a completely safe place.
He does once in the final trilogy when he is introduced to everybody. That scene made me cry when I was reading it the first time, when Queen Kettricken, or actually Prince Dutiful, King Dutiful at the time, I think, announces him, and he is welcomed back.
Yeah, that's a good point. But that's like 60 years from now.
Yeah.
Maybe 50 if I'm not.
It's 45 years from now. He is, I think, exactly 60 in that
and he's
series.
like 17 now, so okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's... But I was just thinking, like, next chapter, he comes back and there's all the nonsense about the witted ones trying to harm Dutiful. And,
next trilogy? Yeah.
Yes, not next chapter, sorry. Next trilogy is about Dutiful getting harmed by people with the wit and the Out Island threat, whatever's going on there, which we later find out what it is, but...
Yeah, he never goes back as Fitz Chivalry until the last series.
And it's very short-lived.
Because he's Tom Badgerlock otherwise.
Yeah. Which also, probably people knew it was Fitz Chivalry.
Some people did, probably.
Oh, yeah. But they liked him, so they kept quiet. They let him play his game. Right, Mr. Tom Badgerlock. Wink.
Fitz is walking around the keep and just noting all of these changes. Things are getting stripped out. Inlanders are everywhere. And the grumble from Buckkeep Town took the form of jests comparing the invasion of the Inlanders with the raids of the Out Islanders. The humor always had a bitter edge. And all of the rooms are being stripped shamelessly of tapestries, rugs, furniture, tools, supplies of all kinds. They're loaded on barges and taken upriver to trade for, always to be, quote, kept safe, or, quote, for the comfort of the king. Some days it seemed that Regal was attempting to see that all he could not carry off with him was devoured before he left.
This really paints a picture of Regal being just a plague.
Yeah, he's literally just destroying everything in his wake before he leaves.
And really, he does kind of destroy everything he touches.
Cloud of locusts.
He's like King Midas.
He's gross.
But instead of turning things to gold, he turns things sour.
So he is waiting here and remarking that, it takes time for the king in waiting ceremony to happen because all the dukes have to be there. Mm-hmm. So it takes a week for all the dukes from the outer duchies to come, and they're surprised by, all of the stripping and the
well, they didn't,
destruction of the keep.
outer outer duchies dukes do not know that Regal is moving the capital.
Right.
They only heard slight rumors, but they were never formally told. Mm-hmm. And Fitz remarks that it's kind of weird that Regal is even going through this whole show anyway, because he clearly doesn't care about the outer islands. It doesn't matter if he's king of them, because he doesn't care about them, and he's going to let them die anyway. So why does he care?
He thinks maybe it's some subtle form against Verity to make his allies witness that or something.
Yeah.
But again, he kind of thinks, as the fool had once warned me, there was no point in trying to measure Regal's wheat with my bushels. We had no common standard. Yeah, so it's just miserable at Buckkeep, and during that whole week, Justin and Serene started haunting Fitz. He was aware of them, often physically following him, but just as often skilling at the edges of Fitz's consciousness. And they were just basically hounding him. He was scared of that, but also terrified that they might just be a distraction, the diversion created to keep him from being aware of Will's more subtle haunting. He says, so I set my guards most strongly about my mind, knowing I probably shielded out Verity as well. I feared this was their actual intent, and dared to reveal that fear to no one. I watched constantly behind myself, using every sense Night Eyes and I possessed. I vowed I would be more wary, and set myself the task of discovering what the other coterie members worked at. Burl was at Tradeford, ostensibly helping prepare the place for King Shrewd's comfort. I had no idea where Carrad was at, and there was no one I could discreetly ask. The only thing I could discover for certain that he was no longer on the Constance, so I worried. It must be miserable being that paranoid and alert 24/7 for weeks on end, however long. I think a full week.
Right. Well, it's worse because it's not just physical harm he has to worry about. It's mental. So he can't even relax in the safety of his room because walls don't keep out the skill.
Yeah.
Distance doesn't keep out the skill. He's always at danger, and that's so terrifying. And I feel very bad for Fitz in this week.
Oh God, yeah. And one morning, Burrich told me that Hans was gone. He had not had the time to bid anyone goodbye. They took horses, and Hans was simply told he was to go along. Mm-hmm. And Burrich told him to go because they needed people to take care of the horses, and at least one person that he knew and he trusted would go along and take good care of them instead of, letting them go to waste. And besides, there's nothing for him here. There is no stable left for anyone to be stable master over.
Right. And clearly, Burrich has marked himself as someone not to be trusted, which probably would have happened with or without his recent involvements with Fitz, because he was Kingsman to Chivalry the Great.
Right.
So I don't think he would have lived a peaceful life regardless of if he knew what was actually going on. I think he would have been held to Regal's pettiness no matter what. Maybe Regal would have let him come along, but would have demoted him and promoted Hans instead, which I don't know how he would have been able to enforce, but whatever.
He wouldn't have demoted Burrich. He would have sent him out to be retired. Just like, hey, you're no longer wanted here.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe he would have just killed him outright. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe. Sent him Regal in the traitor's circle or whatever. Fought the forged ones.
Yeah.
Fitz and Burrich take a tour of the pretty much empty stables and eventually come upon Sudi's empty stall. My heart stood still. I could not speak. I leaned on her manger, my face in my hands. Burrich put a hand on my shoulder. When I looked up at him, he smiled oddly. He shook his cropped head. They came for her and Ruddy yesterday. I told them they were fools. They had taken them last week. And truly they were fools, for they believed me. They did get your saddle. Where? I managed to ask. Better you don't know, Burrich said darkly. One of us dangling as a horse thief would be quite enough. No more would he save it to me. Which I thought was really sweet.
Yeah. Also, a little crazy that Even Burrich is like breaking the law at this point.
Yeah. And horse thief is a very serious crime in everything. And like he says, one of us dangling, it's a death penalty.
Uh-huh. And he was willing to risk it. Honestly, probably more as a slight to Regal than anything. But also because he knows that's Fitz's horse and he's royalty too. And
right.
I don't know. It's really cute.
And that him hiding those horses away is really important because those are the horses that Kettricken and the Fool take out.
Yes.
To escape. After that visit, he has a late afternoon visit to Patience and Lacey. And it wasn't the quiet interlude that Fitz was hoping for because their room is a mess. And not in the usual way. Lacey's trying to put something together from the vacancies in there. Yeah. Because they took the table and Lacey's bed.
Which is horrible.
Right. Supposedly, they were needed for guests. And Fitz has a couple remarks here and just kind of inanely goes on thinking about like what they wouldn't stoop to take away and stuff. Just basically mentioning, oh, maybe you'll be fine when you're in Tradeford, and mentioning that they're going to leave and go upriver. And Lacey is, after a long silence, says, then they'll wait a long time, Fitzchivalry. We are not among those to be taken to Tradeford. Patience says, no, we're the odd folk left to be here with the oddments of furniture.
And she is wiping away tears. Mm-hmm. She has been crying. Do you think she's crying because she's gotten left out of the Tradeford Brigade?
No. I think it's just the whole ransacking of her and her husband's home.
Yeah.
I think it's just the whole situation.
That's fair. I was very curious about this, yeah.
We also learned that she wasn't let in to see the king.
Yeah.
She is feeling cowardly herself because she didn't go visit Kettricken after she heard about the fall, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So I feel like she's just upset at herself for not taking more of an active role, and also upset at the desecration.
The state of things, yeah.
And we also learned that the library is ransacked and a lot of that's gone.
Also, probably, now that I'm thinking about it, she doesn't know Verity isn't dead.
Oh, yeah, Verity is completely dead to her.
Yeah, I'm sure they were somewhat close.
Yeah.
Presumably. I mean
it's her brother-in-law.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure they got along. Because,
Chivalry was super close with Verity, so.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Ugh. Oh, that's really sad to think about, that
that's her last of, like, the family, because King Shrewd won't see her.
Right.
And she's not being let in.
And she knows King Shrewd doesn't like her anyway, so she probably would see that as
her parents are dead.
Yeah.
She has no family.
Right. And Fitz does try to get her to go to Withywood's. He says, why don't you go to Withywood's? And we learn that August is there ruling.
Yep, August is still there, the king's nephew. He who was head of Galen's coterie before his accident.
Which means that he isn't in a vegetative state, because
we know he's not vegetative. He's just not all there in his mind anymore.
Right.
But also, we've had this question before, because I think in the first book we were talking about it, they talked about where August ends up, because his death is super nebulous in the timeline. Because sometimes it sounds like he dies really quickly after that accident, and sometimes, like this, he's the Lord of Withywood's for many a year, and Fitz has heard that he governed fairly over there, at least. Like, he wasn't a terrible person.
Right.
So I think, like, he's just not all there in the head anymore because of that skill burning, and he has, like, a manager run it, and he's basically just kind of there, and he dies shortly.
So probably just young.
Yes.
But also, why was he even Lord anyway?
He's isn't he the king's nephew or something like that?
Well, yeah, but Withywood's is owned by Patience and her parents, I thought.
No. They lived inland. They were in the inland duchies.
Oh.
And Withywood's is part of, like, the royal estates.
Oh, so she was just gifted it.
Yep.
As, okay. I always assumed that was her, like, parents' home.
I thought so too at first, but we had an excerpt, like, at the top of the chapter. I really need to find a technical term for that. Like, the little little italic blurb at the top of each chapter. There was one that was talking about Lady Patience and her parents, and they mentioned inland duchies in there.
Well, I guess I just don't know where Withy Woods is anyway in my mind. It could be anywhere. So the fact that they said they were inland did not dissuade me from thinking that...
It's in Buck Duchy, I'm pretty sure. I'm almost 100% positive it's in Buck Duchy.
I suppose there is a map in this book.
Yeah. And it's within a day's ride because Fitz sends Riddle there all the time with gifts later with Molly and... or I guess that's to Molly and Burrich's place. But they ride back and forth to Withy Woods. So I'm pretty sure it's in Buck Duchy.
It is not labeled on the map, so...
Okay.
Unclear.
At least not that map.
Not the map in front of the Royal Assassin book in this version, which is the 2014 Del Rey Mass Market Edition.
There you go. Withy Woods isn't that important.
Apparently not.
So Fitz kind of offers his bed to Lacey, like, hey, I can bring my bed down here. And Lacey's like, no, don't trouble yourself. I have a pallet made. Like, we're good.
And also, then your bed would also get taken. So. Yeah.
And Patience and Fitz go through the conversation we just kind of had. Has King Shrewd no care for what is happening? She asked. I do not know. All are turned away from his door these days. Regal has said he is too ill to see anyone. And this is where this line following this that Patience says is where I kind of get that she could be crying over like lost family and things like that.
Right.
Because she says, I thought perhaps it was just me he would not see. Ah, well, poor man, to lose 2 sons and see his kingdom come to this. Tell me, how is Queen Kettricken? I have not had a chance to go see her. Well enough, last I saw her, grieved by her husband's death, of course, but then she was not injured in her fall. I feared she would miscarry. Patience turned aside from me to gaze at a wall bereft of a familiar tapestry. I was too cowardly to go and see her myself, if you would know the truth. I know too well the pain of losing a child before you have held it in your arms. Her fall? I said stupidly. Had you not heard? On those awful steps coming down from the Queen's garden, there was a talk that some statuary had been removed from the gardens, and she had gone to see what, and on her way back down she fell. Not a great tumbling fall, but heavily, on her back on those stone steps. Fitz excuses himself as fast as he can after that. We know Rosemary is the one who does this.
Mm-hmm.
And Fitz goes to investigate right away. First he goes to Kettricken's room where he is not allowed in to see her, but her ladies basically, tell him, oh no, she's fine. She
just needs to rest.
Yeah, she needs to rest. So he just confirms that she did not miscarry at the moment, and then he goes to investigate the tower. He sees some of the statuaries and the statues have been taken down and ransacked. Some are left, he thinks, due to just being too heavy to move.
Yeah.
Which is probably fair. They're pure stone, solid stone. And as he goes back down, he investigates the steps to see if anything has been tampered with, and he finds something on the 9th step down.
Yes. He almost finds it in the way Kettricken had.
Yeah, even as he was being super careful.
Mm-hmm. Which begs the question, did they quietly take statues out of the Queen's garden and then only spread word after Rosemary had been able to put the sauce? That is not the word.
The sauce?
Oil.
Oh, yeah.
Some yummy lamp oil.
Lamp black had been mixed with the grease to take the sheen off of it and blend it with the well-used steps.
Yes. So, but it couldn't have been there while they were moving things because They would have slipped. Yeah. So it couldn't have just been there hoping she would go up to her garden. And they would have been taking stuff anyway, so it's not that surprising they took stuff out of her garden. But I'm just wondering, like, what's the timeline like? Did they purposely... Did they have to move quietly? Because otherwise she would have gone up and stopped them, presumably.
Yeah, I have the same sentence highlighted. There was talk that some statuary had been removed from her gardens. Mm-hmm. So they had removed it, spread rumors, or, spoke in the right ears that something had been removed. And I guess it was done before she went up, but it could be done as she was looking around the gardens.
That's a good point.
And then Rosemary rushes back down. Because we learn later that Rosemary thinks it was propositioned to her like a game. This is all a game. It's just a little trick, a little prank that you're playing on her. Put this here.
Right. But also, isn't she kind of old enough to know?
Oh, she's like 7 or 8.
I don't know.
Actually,
I don't have any
6?
children of my own in my life at the moment.
She's somewhere from 6 to 8. I don't remember exactly where. And she's also an orphan who does not talk.
Fair. Well, she talks.
She talks, but like almost never.
Yeah. I guess I just don't know how mature, like what age kids start realizing right from wrong and like where the line of maturity is. Because I feel like 12, definitely you know right from wrong.
Think back to
8 to
where
10,
think back to where Fitz was when he was first getting trained. You even remarked on this before. Some of those games might not have been harmless.
Yes.
If he was asked to put this little powder in this thing, it'll make him feel a little sick. It'll be a fun prank to play, and it kills somebody.
True.
He wouldn't really know.
I suppose. Ooh. Don't love that. Yeah. I guess this just comes down to me being like, come on, Rosemary, you didn't know. But also she's like a literal child. So I'm just thinking of her as the grown-up that we meet later. So I suppose she is like 7. So I'll give her a pass this time, but she's on thin ice.
And as Fitz is checking out the grease, the fool surprises him. And he almost falls. And Fitz basically says, hey, I've been followed of late. My nerves are all a jangle. Don't do that to me. I'm not in the mood for it. And instantly demands, how's the king? As the fool is kind of staying in shadows a little bit. You tell me, the fool stepped out of the shadows. Gone were his fine clothes, replaced with an old motley of blue and red. It went well with the new bruises that mottled one side of his face. On his right cheek, the flesh had been split. One arm carried the other close to his chest. I suspected a dislocated shoulder. Not again, I gasped. Exactly what I said to them. They paid small attention. Some folk just have not the knack of conversation. So, as they were questioning King Shrewd, the fool explains that he was suggesting too wittily, maybe, that they should take themselves everywhere else, and perhaps some other ways they might amuse themselves, and they threw him out. Fitz immediately goes to, what did the king tell them? Ah, now was the king all right, or was the king recovering? No, only what did the king tell them? Do you fear your precious hide is in danger, princeling? Fitz says no, and explains that as long as the king says nothing of Verity being alive, then Regal has no reason to, take everybody else out.
Yeah. Which, I think this is hard because clearly they are both at their wits' end.
Yes.
This is a very horrible situation to be in. They're both pretty young, and they have differing points of view. I think in this point, the fool is taking out his anger on Fitz and trying to hurt him by saying, you only care about yourself. And that's kind of hurtful because Fitz clearly has no concern for his own safety.
Yeah, he says, I could feel no resentment at his question or even how he phrased it. I deserved it.
Yeah.
So he's still self-pitying as Fitz always is.
Right.
But also,
he recognizes that the fool is, well, no, I don't think he does recognize the fool is just mad.
Right.
But yeah, so it's just really hard to watch these two friends take it out on each other almost. I guess Fitz isn't super laying into the fool the way he could be, but it's still sad.
No, Fitz recognizes here the anger that the fool does have, and he's actually emotionally intelligent in this situation for this conversation, at least a little bit more so than he normally is. He says, I had not taken good care of our friendship lately. Despite that, when he needed help, he had come to me. So he's just, staying even-keeled, calm, and explaining his position. And the fool goes on to tell him about what happened and how the king hasn't really been answering any of their questions. My king was being taciturn. It started out as a pleasant conversation between father and son, with Regal telling him how pleased he should be to have him finally as king in waiting. King Shrewd was rather vague, as he often is these days. Something about it irritated Regal, and he began to accuse him of not being pleased, of even being opposed. Finally, he began to insist there was a plot, a conspiracy to see that he never came to the throne. No man is so dangerous as the man who cannot decide what he fears. Regal is that man. Even Wallace was put ajar by his rantings.
It's really crazy to hear about Regal and his outbursts and the way he acts and know that he still has followers that don't see any faults.
Because we see the inside.
Yeah, true. I guess his followers don't really see this, but they do see his drunken rants about conspiracies the way his mother used to be. Sure. Although they liked her too.
Yeah.
So
he has power as well. He's going to be the king.
Okay, this is a little shady of me to say. But do you think the real reason Regal is so popular is because he's kind of easy to manipulate?
Definitely could be.
As long as you make it sound like it's his idea and you praise him and give him drugs and you're on his side.
Yeah.
You can probably get him to do anything you want.
100%. I mean, he's powerful. He has obvious vices and easy ways to get to him. And you can easily pick a side in a very demonstrable way by just being mean to the coastal people.
Yep. Which you probably don't like anyway if you're from the inlands.
Right.
Especially right now in the middle of a war where all of your money is going to them. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of mean of me to say. But honestly, can't think of a greater reason why people in power would seem to flock to him.
He'll bring them more power.
Yeah.
And give them good parties, too.
True.
Those parties must be lit, honestly.
I don't know if I'd want to go to his parties because he's a horrible human being, but also kind of want to go to his parties.
I would want to be in the room next door to them, just so I could have the food and the drinks and stuff, but not be near them at all.
True. Yeah, they're kind of horrible people. Yeah.
And speaking of how horrible he is, he imprisons his own father during this conversation, throws Wallace out and all of his pain medication, and basically says, the king doesn't need any medication until he starts talking to me.
Also, nobody says anything about this. Everybody just goes along with it, and they're like, yes, my liege. Dude, that's the real king. You can't just treat him like that, but they can because it is Regal who is in charge at this point, but...
Regal would remorselessly watch while the pain crept past the numbing herbs to overwhelm his father. I could not imagine a man being capable of this, yet I knew Regal would do it. When did this happen? Just an hour or so ago. You are not an easy person to find. And so the fool immediately goes to Fitz after all of this happens, or tries to go to Fitz, and it is a mark on their friendship and the fool's faith in what Fitz can do.
Yeah.
Fitz directs the fool to go down to Burrich because he knows that the healer won't touch him. And the fool asks, what will you be doing? I don't know, I replied honestly. This was exactly one of the situations I had warned Chade about. I knew whether I acted or not, the consequences would be grave. I needed to distract Regal from what he was doing. Chade, I was sure, was aware of what was going on. If Regal and all others could be lured away for a time, I could think of only one piece of news that might be important enough to Regal to make him leave Shrewd. And that piece of news, as we find out in the next chapter, is Kettricken miscarrying.
Mm-hmm.
When I was first reading this, I was like, oh, is he going to say that Verity's alive? like I was a first-time reader not remembering what happened next, but I remember, and I looked ahead to confirm that a little bit later, that Fitz asks Kettricken to pretend that she's miscarrying and to say, like, I fear that I might have miscarried, and Wallace would go, and Regal couldn't help himself but go along to check.
Right.
Because he's disgusting.
Just a side note, she does.
Yes.
Later.
She does.
So it is very sad, but also, I guess, needed to help the king. I don't know.
I don't know if it's at the same time, to be honest.
Yeah.
Or if it was I think it's a miscarriage, because I'm pretty sure she leaves pregnant still.
Yeah.
And I think it's a miscarriage on the journey.
Right. It is a tough journey, and it's a very stressful situation to be in. Yeah. So, it does make sense. It just, yeah.
And so Fitz starts to go down the steps, and the fool stops him and makes him promise, or tells him, threatens him, when you take my king away, I go with him. I mean it. I wore Regal's collar for the sake of that promise from him. It means nothing now to him. I can make no promises, I said quietly. I can. I promise that if my king is taken and I do not go with him, I will betray every one of your secrets. Every one. The fool's voice was shaking. He put his head back against the wall. I turned away hastily. The tears on his cheeks were tinged pink from the cuts on his face. I could not bear to see them. I ran down the stairs. Things are accelerating.
Yeah.
And Fitz has kind of verbalized in this chapter what we already knew of how he's a catalyst and what the fool has told him. His choices have consequences that pile up, and there are events that happen. If he acts or if he doesn't act, there is going to be a huge repercussion throughout everything.
Right. This is, I think, one of the few times we see Fitz kind of think ahead about what does this mean? What are the consequences of what I'm about to do? In a way that I think is different than later.
Okay, so I agree with you, but at the same time, I feel like we're not giving him enough credit, because I feel like there are times where he does think ahead. It's just that when he messes up, it's so monumental. When he rushes things in, that's all we remember.
True.
So I feel like there are times that we're not giving them the benefit of the doubt for, but at the same time, I can't remember them.
I'm sure in his practices of being an assassin, there are times when he's thinking ahead.
He just doesn't.
It's not long term. Also, he probably doesn't narrate every time he thinks ahead. But I feel like when he does, it's usually not long term. What does this mean? And in this moment where he realizes every little choice he's made up to this point has put everyone he loves in danger of dying, he realizes, okay, whatever I choose needs to be something that is a good ripple, and I have to make sure that this steers away from people dying.
Right.
And it feels more big picture rather than get from point A to point B.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the difference, is just what do these ripples mean, and can I handle that in the future?
This chapter is just tense.
Right.
Because I know what's coming, and coming shortly. And I don't want to get there and read it.
Yeah. I know. I can feel myself pulling back from wanting to read this series because we're getting to it so slowly that it's like, oh, I don't want to know. I don't want to see. I don't want Fitz to go through all the pain. And maybe if I bring up all the things that could have changed right now, it won't happen.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in this week. If you have anything to say about these chapters or how dumb Fitz is in the future, or if he actually does plan ahead, please let us know. Email us your theories, comment to us what you think about things, message us your memes. We're at isfitshappy@gmail.com or isfitshappy, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and that is our username on Reddit as well.
Okay, so
the second part of our episodes,
the mini podcast part, with viewership participation. I want to start out just by saying thank you to the people who reached out and were concerned. We missed last week. There was just unexpected family emergency that we had to attend to, and we're back now. Everything is okay. We're doing good here. Mm-hmm. Thank you all for your love and concern.
Yeah, the outpouring support is awesome. Mm-hmm. Support systems are very important.
Yes.
In every single time. So family was our first go-to, but we really appreciate you guys being there for us too.
Yeah. And we do want to say that we apologize for not having a show ready to go for you guys. We just had a couple long weeks and not really any time to prepare for unexpected problems.
Yeah.
So
try to get ahead of the schedule and start recording early a little bit, but you know how it goes sometimes. Sometimes
we're
it works
all living
out.
the
Sometimes.
Same life in some capacity. But yeah, thank you guys for being understanding, and thank you to everyone who reached out. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Without further ado, we have a interesting comment that we got, a message on Instagram from Vanessa. And they were talking about our conversation around Farseer heirs and how the Fool wanted a Farseer heir to multiply the possibilities for the future. We were kind of discussing, who those heirs were and how Dutiful was one of those heirs, but Nettle was also that possibility with Molly being pregnant. And Vanessa brings up the point that if Nettle is an heir, why isn't there that future with Fitz being also a Farseer heir? Why isn't there those, multiple points spanning out and all the possibilities? Mm-hmm. Why does Molly or Kettricken have to be pregnant for those new things to happen? And they also say maybe the Fool couldn't see past Fitz's death, which I really liked the phrasing of some of those and the thoughts that this brought to me. Mm-hmm. Because I was thinking that if there's no heir besides Fitz for the Farseer line, the chances that it continues is incredibly small, because Fitz isn't supposed to be alive.
Right.
He is the catalyst. He's the one that is against all odds. Mm-hmm. So if everything is relied on for him being alive, the past of the future that the Fool could get to through Fitz has to be incredibly infinitesimally small to get to those future paths. Mm-hmm. Like there may be like one string that he could get to with a huge branching,
right? But
with a new baby or an extra 2 babies, the paths multiply so much more. So it's incredibly slim that Fitz survives how he does, especially using his wit to go into Night Eyes and then be revived back into his body. There were a lot of times where Fitz almost gave up, and it took months for him to get back to a normal semblance of a human.
Yeah.
So for the Fool's future, I think it's mostly the Fool hedging his bets and saying there has to be more Farseer heirs for my future to actually work, because you are not going to be the solution. I need you to shift the future to help that come up to life,
right?
But there needs to be other people for you to help.
Yeah, it does bring up the point that the Fool is convinced Fitz is going to die
at some point. It's just
at some point, clearly, but in a way that makes him useless after death to getting on the path that Fool wants.
Yeah. And also I was kind of thinking it could be possible that, and it is true, that those babies, the future heirs, are needed for the Tawny Man trilogy plot lines. Like,
also that.
They need to be in those positions for that to work out, to bring dragons back. And I don't think the Fool is thinking that far ahead yet. So I think the Elderlings are his goal. Like, we need to do this in order to secure this. But
because
that's like a pipe dream.
Yeah, he thinks the Elderlings, number 1, are still alive, and number 2 are going to bring back dragons in some way.
Yeah.
Although it's very unclear if he's always known that dragons are the end goal.
I think it's very unclear to him as well. Mm-hmm. I feel like he's pushed towards this direction, and he needs to do this before he can think of anything else.
I almost view it, the way I view how the Fool picks which path to go on is that there's all these like little light paths that stream out of everything, and they're different colors, and the brighter the color, the better the future.
Yeah.
And just the world as a whole is on such a dark path that he doesn't really know what the light one brings, but he knows that it's better than whatever path it is they're on now.
Mm-hmm. And the little branching part has to be Fitz making a decision, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is a big ask, so...
So thank you so much for messaging us to that. It made me think a little bit more in depth about the Farseer heirs and the Fool's abilities and things like that. So that was a fun little brain exercise there. And I think that's it for all the messages that we had this week.
Yeah.
But I do want to send out a thank you to everyone who has sent in things before, but also who has told your friends about us, your family about us, or, maybe this sparked your interest in this series again to tell other people to read this series.
Yeah.
Things like that. It's awesome. And I do want to give a special shout out to those who have rated us or reviewed us on your favorite podcasting applications, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podcast Addict, Castbox, Podchaser, Listen Notes. There's a billion of them. And I'm not even sure all of the platforms that we appear on. We have Magic Internet Box do that for us. So
yes.
Thank you, everyone who has supported us in every single way.
And been part of the process.
And been a part of the process. We really do appreciate everything you guys have done.
Thank you, guys.